there's political contestation, it's not necessarily between a kind of standard static idea of good governance and then corruption on the other side, but actually there are different ways of doing good governance. So for example, in the Lagos model, we see this idea of accountability as performance, which is, it starts with the kind of premise that maybe the voters don't know what would be best for them, but an enlightened government should deliver the sort of infrastructure and public services that will help development. And after 4 years, the voters can look at what they've done and ask the question, have they performed? And this is quite different to kind of scholarly accounts of accountability, which tend to emphasize responsiveness to the voters' needs. However, under the Lagos model, and if you see people like Bolarinwa talking about how they think of accountability, it's often much more about responding to people's needs rather than just their wants. On the other hand, I articulate this idea of accountability as accessibility. And so that comes from the frequently heard term, and I'll wrap this up in just a minute or two, the frequently heard term that good leaders in Nigeria should be accessible. And what I noticed was, again, in the political science literature, there wasn't much literature that actually touched on this idea. And so it's something that we can see emerging from the Nigerian space, and we can use it more broadly to think about kind of the universal ideas of accountability. And so I theorize accessibility as the maintenance of spaces for direct communication between leaders and their constituents. And I in the book, I elaborate on this. I think it's important for holding people to account via social sanctions, and that is a way of kind of overcoming inequalities in power. And so just to give you an example of accessibility, in the most recent presidential election, Peter Obi was often celebrated as being very accessible. He traveled around without security, people ran into him in the airport queue, he carried his own briefcase. So from my book, I think the argument I'm giving is that rather than always seeing Nigeria as a face-off between good governance and bad governance, we can actually see it as a competition between different interpretations of what good governance might mean. So let me leave it there. That's just a really brief introduction, but I'm sure we'll hear many other interesting and valuable contributions from the other presenters. So I'll hand it back to Prof. Badejo.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Roelofs. Toby, are you back on? Toby Adewumi. I can see movements at your end. Hello, Professor Odukoya. Professor Odukoya, you will need to unmute yourself. Or is that Professor Otubanjo coming on? I think so. Our chap.
Hello.
Hello. Okay.
Hello,
yes,
Professor
Odukoya.
Hello,
yes.
sir. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very well. We can hear you.
Where I am, I'm stepping out so that. Okay. Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. Good evening, everybody. Yeah, it's nice to join this very important conversation. I hope you can hear me, please.
Yes, we can hear you.
Hello?
Go ahead. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, it's very important. Okay, fine. That's very important conversation. Let me start by congratulating Toby for the good work they have been doing on this platform. And more importantly, let me equally congratulate my own teacher, Professor Femi Badejo. He was my teacher at the undergraduate level. And if I'm a political scientist today, I think it's one of my encouragement, and I need to underscore that. He might have forgotten when I was going to do my project in those years. My project was quite unconventional. My project took place under an environment where we had this debate about political instability. And this is a young political science student who wants to argue that Nigeria was politically stable, but it's only governmentally unstable. Everybody didn't see sense in what I was saying, but I approached Professor Badejo, then Dr. Femi Badejo. Of course, maybe I need to say that nobody actually liked approaching Dr. Badejo because his principle and discipline, and students don't actually like that. So when I explained to him, he said, "Oh, fantastic idea, why not? Go ahead. Although You may not get material to do that, but if you are theoretically grounded, you should be able to do that. Yeah, that encouragement meant a lot to me. And I did that project and I had an A. So, Prof, let me thank you again for that. And that encouragement has stayed with me. So, again, this work for me, it's not strange because, again, one of the things we were made to do then was having a gene push to some of the things he did with his PhD work. And Professor Badejo has this idea about, he has this of actually being unconventional, thinking outside what they say the box, if there is any box to think outside. But it's unique in its own distance. It does not feel, it's not afraid to stand in alone. I got the work a few days ago. I won't say I've gone through it thoroughly, but I've tried to actually have some inputs into what he has said. And starting from the type 2 of what the way governance and the crisis of underdevelopment in Africa and situating it within the power, the context, the 4 pillars he has done is actually very important at any point in time. The issue of development and underdevelopment for us in Africa is actually a fundamental issue, and for anybody and a scholar of Professor Badejo's methods and wider exposure doing that, I think is a major contribution to knowledge. And it is in that context that I want to have a peep into his thinking and try to make 1 or 2 critiques here and there. Yeah, let me start by saying that the issues that have been raised in terms of the 4 legs, the 4 pillars are germane, particularly in terms of the external dimension for me. Most analysis of the problem of development and underdevelopment on the continent, and particularly Nigeria and elsewhere in the third world, have actually run away from the issue of that external dimension. Yes, why it may not longer be visible or acceptable for us to stay at the level of water rodings, how Europe underdeveloped Africa. It is clear to us that Africans on daily basis are equally underdeveloping Africa. That we cannot run away from that. But again, too, for anybody to think that agency does not matter, for anybody to think that the structure does not matter, in terms of that, it has been several years after colonialism, why are we still where we are? What have we done for ourselves? That begs the issue. Like the Yoruba will say, you see a crippled man that the load on his head is not standing erect. The crippled man itself, the leg is not erect, so there's no way what is putting on his head will stand erect. So what we say in essence that the structure matter, and we are saying the structure, I'm saying the structure of colonial dependency, the structure of the African state and the Nigerian state that we have are still important in actually determining what is happening here. So it is in that context that I actually appreciate the external dimension brought into the discussion. Although I still have issue with that, even the discourse of that external dimension, which I will come to much later. Again, to the issue of development for me, yeah, again, maybe the trajectory of Professor Badejo's career from the academics to the world, to the United Nations, UN, and things like that. Again, equally impacted on what he's doing in terms of, for me, the development, the definition or the conceptualization of development that I have from what I've read of the book is just not too different from what the Western powers will actually give us from what we have there. Because development, the question for me is that whose development are we even talking about? Development, the way we are being fed with, is actually too paternalistic. It is just consume it and take it that way. And I feel development must be defined and conceptualized in our own way for our own purpose, not as the image of this of any power or any ideology or external to us. And it is in that respect that, for me, I think the issues, the 4 pillars, important as they are, And of course, I was happy much later that it was equally addressed. They are actually an effect, because more fundamentally, and I will go to that in some minutes, more fundamentally, the issue, the crisis of underdevelopment in Africa is rooted in imperialism in the first instance, both in the past and in its present continuity. And that must be said. And that's why I said maybe the career trajectory of my Oga does not allow that. The Professor Badejo, I know when they will go out and say that, I could not see that coming there. Although he said it is not just colonialism, yes, fine, but we cannot discount the role, the continuous role of imperialism, past, present, and in this thing, and particularly in the present constellation of the transition from international capitalism to transnational capitalism and its implication on what we do and what we don't do within the context of African states. I call it at a donor level, that spark that I talk about in Prof was there. I could see there here and there. For example, where he's saying that, yeah, even in terms of policy, alternative is not that our people, our leaders don't have alternative. But again, some forces are not allowing that alternative to be possible. I'm saying we need to name those forces. We need to be because we are trying to find solutions. Then again, we must, what a major thing that I felt should need to have been engaged that will equally enrich this thing, which is a very important leg, is equally the nature and character of the Nigerian state itself. The Nigerian state, the problem of leadership, the problem of corruption, the problems of the conflicts, the problem of what do we have there? Lack of peace, and all of these things are equally associated with the kind of political economy of the Nigerian state itself. We cannot expect anything but those things from them. For example, what we have in the Nigerian state, we are having a state that is, you cannot compare or does not have the same characteristic or the same capacity like the normal Western states. The autonomy of the states are not there. Those who control the states at best are agents and are self-serving. So, and of course, the fact that they are equally not actually the dominant class we have here. They are people, they are actually, to use the word of J.J. Dara, they are commercial agents, and they are serving three masters. The first master is the transnational imperialist master that is still in control of the economy of this country, and to whom the means of production is in their hand. So they are just middlemen. Then they are serving their own interests, and they face the crisis of reproduction, the crisis, and how to actually ensure their own hegemony. And again, the third master is the people themselves. So all this violence, human rights violation don't just happen, but they must necessarily happen within the context of the Nigerian state. Because it's a state, it's an oppressive state, it's a state that annihilates the leaders from the people, it's a state that is exploited and is dominated by external this thing. So if we don't factor this into this thing, we'll just be scratching the surface. So what am I saying in essence? That the issue of corruption is an intimate, you cannot separate corruption from capitalism generally and from a decadent peripheral capitalist society like ours. Corruption will always be there. And this change we are talking about will not just happen. And whether we have, you cannot even have the human rights, you cannot have security, we cannot have peace, and we have resources. The resources are there, but again, too, it's within who are those making these resources, whether natural resources or material resources. We have the Japa syndrome. It is part of this crisis and contradictions of accumulation that we are facing here. Those who are in control here, the leadership or leaders we are talking about, they are not, in fact, we cannot even call them capitalists, because you cannot be a capitalist without capital. These are people that are not involved in production. Even in capitalist society, you must produce. These are people who are not involved in production. The state is a means of production. The state is equally a site of struggle. So it is within this context that we must understand those issues that have been pinpointed as problematic for development. Then again, talking about democracy. Democracy again, and I'm very happy, and I want to comment to this because most of our people are celebrating more in terms of the kind we have been democratic on the Democratic Party since 1999. But I thank Professor Badejo for making it clear that this liberal democracy is just a pretext. It's a scam. Liberal democracy is a democracy of disempowerment, democracy of exclusion. Our people are not there. It's just electoralism, rituals of year or 4 yearly this thing. The people are not part of it. So democracy should be about the people and for the people. It's not about the plutocracy or the mass looting that we are witnessing. And Beckman asked that question: whose democracy are we talking about? And for the purpose of this discussion, liberal democracy is a democracy with limited or no participation. Then we have bourgeois democracy. The space for the people to participate and control government is not there. The democracy we'll be talking about is popular democracy. The democracy where the people are in control and it works for them. And it is that context that I equally have some limitation in terms of democracy being seen in terms of utmost freedom, particularly because the author himself defined utmost freedom as idealistic, something that is not attainable. I think with this level that we have, what we need, what the ordinary Nigerian needs is a democracy that can be quantified in terms of the degree to which the people can control, the people own, and the people can participate in democracy. That is not existing. Then again, so leadership will not just come from anywhere. Leadership that will have, whether we have all these 4 factors there, will always continue as long as we work within the framework of the dependent, decadent capitalist system. And what I'm proposing is that the first task for us as Nigerians or Africans is to actually ensure that the kind of state we have here, that these are states that were merely inherited from colonialism in terms of neo-colonialism. These are states that were put in place not to serve the interests of African people. These are states that are oppressive, exploitative, and alienating from this thing. Those states cannot do anything other than they are doing. Those states cannot produce a different set of leaders. Except so the people must take the destiny into their hand. We must. I'm not talking about reforming the state because the state is unreformable the way it stands. The state must be smashed by the people themselves and take over our power from them. So let me hand so that others could talk. By again appreciating the good work my teacher have done. This thing, I think there's a lot of prospect with this work, and I think maybe with this process of this discussion, the work can still be refined and improved. And I see this as a pathway that we can all embrace to actually start charting a unique and Afrocentric path to African development, and Nigeria in particular. Thank you for having me. That's my brief contribution. Thank you.
That's very great, Professor Odukoya. I very much took notes in terms of the suggestions you have made and the critique you have done. I want to, on a lighter note, say that another former student of mine, Imam Najim Jimo, is equally on, and sometime last week or this week now, I don't remember, he wrote to me that when he was a student, all the students had concluded that I am a sadist, and I shared that with my wife, my family in general, and my wife responded that exactly what you have said. No, you have never been a sadist. You have always been principled, and it's because Najim Jimo found out the way you did that when he came to me for his project, I was extremely open, and he ended up with an A and told me also that all through, I didn't apart for years, that he had A's all through and ended up with a first class, which is great. So, Prof, I am very grateful. I think Professor Otubanjo is with us now, and I'm going to have him take over the guidance of the process as we hopefully Toby would indicate who are the other discussants.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Yeah, thank
Toby.
you so much for that. And apologies again for this. Just immediately on the floor, I just wanted to
Prof.
Okay, just a minute. I'll returning back to the hall. I mean to the meeting. So I just want to give some housekeeping rules just for the benefit of those who are joining us before we started. This is GRC Public Intellectual Seminar Series, and what we are doing today is to review and discuss the top the theme, governance, and the crisis of development in Africa. And we are looking or taking insights from the work of Professor Babafemi Badejo titled Nigerians' Views on National Turmoil, the Situational, Quadruple, Nexus. And so the rest of the discussion will proceed on not just that book, but many of those who may already have read it, but on the larger themes or the larger issues or debates of governance and development in Africa. And thankfully, many of us here, if not all of us, are African researchers or African-based researchers, and so we can relate to some of these concepts. And so before Professor Femi Otubanjo comes on board, I would just like to introduce other speakers here with us. Like I said earlier, Dr. Idowu Johnson is a lecturer at the Department of Political Science at the University of Ibadan. Dr. Johnson, it's good to have you with us here this evening. Then, of course, Portia Roelofs just left. She is also a lecturer at King's College, London. And she also recently published a book titled Good Governance in Nigeria, Rethinking Accountability and Responsibility in the 21st Century. Accountability and Transparency, I beg your pardon, in the 21st century. And that's also a very interesting book.
Hello.
Professor Otubanjo, please take over so that the next person can come on.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Can you hear me? I hope you can hear my voice.
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you very well, sir.
Distinguished participants, I'm sorry that I had some initial technical problem. I got part of Dr. Portia Roelofs' presentation and the whole of Dr. Laja Odukoya. I think we're supposed to have Dr. Idowu Johnson, if he's on, to make his presentation. Dr. Idowu Johnson from the University of Ibadan. Are you online? If you are, please present. Dr. Idowu Johnson. It doesn't seem to. Okay, sir, Idowu Johnson's name is there, but it's
maybe it's muted. Maybe he's muted.
Dr.
Yes, unmute yourself, Dr. Johnson.
Yes, it's muted. Dr. Johnson, both video and these things are off.
Yeah, okay, he has unmuted.
Okay, you are on now. Dr. Johnson, please give us your presentation. You have 10 minutes.
Good afternoon, yes. Prof.
Good afternoon. You're welcome.
Yeah, I'm very, very happy to be with my senior professors, Professor Dele Jinodu, yes, and Professor Badejo and Professor Otubanjo and other, yes, colleagues. When I got the book, I was very impressed with the 4 pillars that Professor Badejo have discussed, particularly in the area of peace, security, development, and humanitarianism. Now, I can assure everybody here that one of those things that we have been facing in Africa and Nigeria in particular is because of the nexus between, development, and humanitarianism. And when I was going through the book,
I can see that Professor Badejo addressed this problem from both theoretical and practical angle. From theoretical angle, as an international scholar who have traveled all over the world, particularly within the context of African states, was giving us the nexus between conflict, development, peace, and security, as well as human rights and humanitarianism. Now, basically, President Badejo maintained a strong case of interconnectedness between conflict, peace, security, and development. Now, he observed that there is no way we can talk about a development when the state is in crisis, there's violent conflict, and at the same time, humanitarian affairs is not working well in our country. Now, if you look at the structure of the book, President Badejo divided the book into 4 chapters. Now, the first chapter is trying to give us the introduction, here with giving us the root causes of conflict, particularly in the context of Nigeria, Boko Haram, banditry, insurgency, violent conflicts, even some crime in most of the cities in Nigeria. Now, when you look at the SQL, which was talking about the institutional quadruple nexus, it's giving us the fact that there is no way a country like Nigeria can develop when we have not addressed the issue of development, and there's no way you can have development when there's a crisis of violence and whether insecurity in the states. Now, he's checking this analysis through collaboration, at the same time, coherence, in which the state must be willing to come to reality by trying to look at the root causes of a conflict before you can now talk about a development. Now, again, if you look at development, there is no way we can talk about development when you don't have genuine democracy. Now, what we have in Nigeria, particularly in most parts of Africa, is not really democratic structure or democracy. But what we have is that we have election whereby we selected electoral notabilities. In other words, those people that are willing to serve the country are not given the opportunity. In Nigeria, for instance, democracy is too expensive. Because you can become a governor in Nigeria, at least you must be boasting about 1 billion naira. How many of the intellectuals can have even 30 million naira to situate themselves in the democratic arena? So like Professor Odukoya said, the state, you must first of all understand the state, the crisis of the state, before you can understand the present predicament Nigeria is facing. Nigerian state is a bourgeoisie state and also be entrenched with the colonial mentality. So both of the bourgeoisies are in the power corridor and they don't allow majority of the citizens to prevail. Now, again, one of the things that I find very most beautiful in the book is that Professor Badejo giving us some kind of survey report. I'm trying to look at the response of Nigeria on the 4 pillars which have already identified in the Quadruple Nexus. In other words, the interview being done to citizens in the area of peace, in the area of security, in the area of development, and also in the area of development. Now you can see that most of the responses were trying to give us the fact that when you look at there are some unmet humanitarian needs, like youth empowerment, access to water and healthcare. We have a low level of education in the country, food insecurity, and also poverty. And there is no way we can meet up with the SDG goals, certain violent goals, particularly in the area of poverty, and also to lead people out of their poverty. Because of the fact that the survey report presented by Professor Badejo is very, very useful by trying to look at there is no way we can have good development in the area of what do you call it, a democratic institution, when we don't look at the 4 nexus. That is, which also imply that governance is very important, and also we look at the institutions. Our institution is very, very, we have very weak institutions. All those advanced countries we are copying, they have strong institutions. And that's the reason why we have a lot of lopsidedness in the area of institutional arrangement. Take the judiciary, for example. Our judiciary is very, very weak. And that's the reason why they use the judiciary to destabilize the ASU strike. And also they are now bringing out the weak inside the game by trying to look at even in the about 2 hours ago, we have been reading that the NSC have been told not to go on strike because there is a court order. These are weak institutions, and it affects our developmental prospect. Again, what I want to put more here that is very important and germane is that we are talking about development, and we are talking about democracy, we are talking about rule of law. We must also emphasize that we are copying the international community. Most of the policy that we have been following here are SLA imposed. And in other words, even we have our own developmental agenda before the advent of colonialism and also imperialism. So we need to go back to that, our own old way of doing things. And that's the way we have to look at the Asian tigers. Although they embrace some aspects of the Western cultural aspect of it in capitalism, but they never try to destroy their own base-grown economic strategy. And that's the reason why we have problems in Africa. We need to move forward by trying to look at, there is no way you can develop without looking at your own developmental agenda. We need the contents of traditional mechanism. So even though we have transformed traditional economy to modern economy, we must also go back to the basics. The issue of corruption is because we never learn from how we have been doing it in the past. Particularly, we need the contents of good governance as pertain to old way of doing things in Africa. But by copying the Western culture, the Western ideas, it has not helped us totally. And even though we have material and natural resources, most of our leaders are too materialistic. And that's the reason why we don't have any social welfareism. And in the advanced country we are copying, an average political leaders in that country, we want to make sure that once they are in office, they want to make sure that the lives of the citizens improve. They want to make sure that there's education. They want to make sure that there's health services for everybody. But in the reverse case of our country, why they are going there is not because they want to serve. They are going there for their own parochial interest, to make sure that even their incoming unborn family of the next 50-year generation are to be part of the money they're going to steal. And that's the reason why you cannot have development. There is no way you can have peace when people are suffering, they have no a job. What I want Professor Badejo to do is that maybe in the near future to enlarge on this book, I want Prof to make sure that there is no way I'm going to talk about security. He must also let us know about the human approach to security, which is the humanitarian angle. Although he has already stretched it, but we need to move further by trying to look at the UNDP definition of security. Because it is only when you're talking about, you may try to defend your territory with military capability, but when people are suffering, there's no job. Those people that are jobless can easily be mobilized into ethnic militias. And that's what we're facing in Nigeria to do. That in the area of external dynamics, very, very good. The failure of development is because we fail to realize that human rights is based on utmost freedom. Nigerians are not free. And that's the reason why we have a lot of civil society that have been caged. The civil society of nowadays are not the way we have it in the 70s, in the 80s, and 1990s. I'm trying to even question myself that where are those civil society organizations that fought the British government in the 1990s? They have slept, and they are not. Majority of them now are a civil society organization that are engaging in monetary aspect of it. They are not doing what they're supposed to have done as we have witnessed it in the past. And finally, it is also wrong to say that Nigeria has not made any progress globally. I think Professor Badejo have mentioned it. What we have here is that we have used our soft power, but the soft power is that majority of those soft power are only based on the filmmaking and industry, and also in the area of church. Nigeria is one of those countries that have the largest congregation in terms of church. Our pastors are making money, but the people that are going to the church are very poor. Our pastors are bringing out a lot of schools with exorbitant fees, but the children of the poor cannot have access to the school. I, as an Anglican that was brought up, I don't think I can send my children to the Anglican embassy now because of the high level of school fees. Now, finally, there is no way you can have development within the contents of what Professor Badejo have said in the content people, without trying to look at and address the problem of the leadership. Our leaders are very corrupt, and not only that they are very corrupt, they also are of the fact that they don't want those people that will challenge them so that they continue to dominate the entire Nigerian state. And I think with this, I'm very, very happy that most of the write-up that we are trying to examine in the content of political discipline have been addressed by Professor Badejo in the area of peace, development, humanitarianism, and also that of security. Thank you for having me, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson, for your enlightening contribution. I can see that your contribution and that of Professor Odukoya seem to be going the same direction, but we shall come to that later on. So I'd like to invite Dr. Bolarinwa to make his own presentation. Dr. Bolarinwa?
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, yes.
Good evening, the chairman, our distinguished professor, Femi Otubanjo. I also greet our referred professor, Laja. I also acknowledge our dear professor, Badejo, and other distinguished speakers and scholars on board. I am speaking particularly in the area of, my contribution is in the area of peace and security, as contributed and discussed by Professor Badejo. But generally, I also have a stint with the issue of governance. Governance generally is an act, or it can be seen as a process of governing or overseeing or control, and also giving direction of doing something, or by which a country does its things in the way it should be rightly done in order to benefit not only the government, but also the governed, and particularly everyone in such a country. So governance is a system that provides a framework for managing societies, for managing the people, for managing the resources, and to achieve what the country actually needs. And it identifies also basically, particularly in a democratic government, who can take or make decisions, who has the authority to act in certain areas, especially on behalf of the organization or the society, and who also should be accountable. One of the very major things in governance is accountability, and for how a society and its people behave and perform, which also deals with the rule of law in a particular society. But in Africa, since independence, or we'll say immediately after independence, Africans, or what the people in Africa, the high expectations they had was that immediately after independence, development will come quickly. Immediately after independence, development, everything will come as if they are naturally coming to us, or they will naturally come. But unfortunately, after independence, these hopes were dashed. They were dashed because the expected governance, especially good governance, and even the democratic element of that democracy that Africa expected, did not come to us. And we did not even have the benefit. We didn't gain it. And before we know it now, we could not have what we call a good governance. But of course, good governance comes with democracy. And democracy, people believe that there is a nexus between democracy and development. It is believed that once you have democracy, there will be development. But in reality, and particularly the democracy we practice in Africa, and even Nigeria by extension, as alluded to by Prof in his book, is a different democracy we are seeing here in Africa and in Nigeria. The democracy that we cannot even situate within the empirical literature, liberal democracy. The liberal democracy we are practicing here, just like some other speakers before now have alluded to, the democracy is too expensive. The democracy, we cannot put it within other democracies around the world. It's not only too expensive, it's also very large, and it comes with a lot of costs. And these costs, they are even affecting governance, and thereby retarding, debarring, preventing what we call good governance. And as UNDP has rightly put it, having good governance, which should be by extension an aspect of democracy, is when it entails accountability, transparency, fairness, and even responsibility, taking responsibility for every action that takes place, particularly providing such good governance, accountable transparency, and be transparent, and also giving the people what they deserve. And thereby, if there is development, if there is all of these characteristics of good governance, there will be development. And if there is development, there will be peace and progress, or there will be peace and security. Unfortunately, all of these have not been prevalent. All of these have not been so prevalent, and these have been leading to crises, different conflicts, and these conflicts, they have seriously affected development. Before the advent of the Fourth Republic in Nigeria in 1999, the military had ensured relative peace across the country, and even in some parts of Africa where we had military rule before that period. But immediately after democracy was adopted, or we began the Fourth Republic in 1999, then we started seeing all forms of agitations, fightings, from the Niger Delta agitations to what we now have as IPOB, Boko Haram insurgency, and from Boko Haram insurgency, we also had some other variants of what we call banditry, kidnapping, thuggery, even robbery became high level or high tech thing, whereby you can rob even a whole state.
She doesn't want to talk in She's bringing it up and down. She wants to leave it here. Ask her.
Or you rob a country, or you rob a society or a whole town at the same time. So the issue of peace and security has become a major issue in the past 2-3 decades that democracy have been adopted across African continents, and especially in Nigeria. And we now see agitations here and there. We see fightings, killings, we see conflicts all over places. So peace and security as something that we've seen that implies a synergy, a complementary state, or something that presents what we call, we don't want violence, we don't want conflict, we want to prevent the society from going into serious violence, fighting problem, or the country. But what we have is that even seeing peace and security as a means to other ends, or an end in itself, all of these have affected development across Africa. And it was mentioned in the paper by Professor Badejo that because Africa have been riddled with different forms and types of conflicts, ranging from religious conflicts, resource conflicts, and also even political conflicts, from leadership crisis, and because of the sit-tight attitude of African leaders, changing of constitution, tossing with the constitution. Rwanda is a case in point where Paul Kagame has changed the constitution to whatever he has now, and there he will be there until he dies. Sorry to say, even within this democratic dispensation of the Fourth Republic, we saw a president in Nigeria under President Obasanjo trying to go for a third term, and all of this. What we have witnessed so far in Africa have been demonstration of elections. We do elections in and out, every 4 years in some country, every 5 years, we change government, crisis follows. What we also see is that we see all of these political actors fighting themselves, creating problems across Africa. Only recently, as aspect of governance, we saw the resurgence of coups across Africa, particularly in West Africa. And we have seen the radicalization of the Sahel also, that comprises both Central and West African states or countries. All of them are very, very weak. They are weak states. They are not only weak states, they also have weak institutions. They don't only even have weak institutions, we are always riddled in dependency. Majority of African countries are riddled in dependency. We depend on everything that comes from the West, or if we don't run to the West, EU, America, or Canada, or elsewhere, we know we believe we cannot do anything rightly. We have the crisis of dependency, crisis of leadership, corruption has pervaded the entire society of Africa. Even Nigeria is not an exception. Poverty is everywhere. The major problem today in Africa, including Nigeria, is the problem of poverty. Poverty everywhere. People are riddled in poverty. People cannot afford even 1 square meal. There are unemployment problems everywhere. And when people are unemployed, they have the tendency to go into crisis, conflicts, corruption, thuggery, banditry, stealing, even terrorism. And all of these things have pervaded the entire society. Unfortunately, we have very bad leadership. The leadership are not doing things rightly. The leadership are not taking the interest of the generality. The interest of the people or the interest of the citizens are not really taken into serious consideration. If that is done, there could be very less crisis, or we prevent conflicts as we have seen all over today. Only yesterday, we saw whether some media have reported it as a mutiny, some are already reporting it as a coup that we even just witnessed in the Niger Republic only yesterday. And the issue of prebendalism, even bureaucracy, and the issue of weak institutions whereby after elections, we see people going to courts, fighting everywhere, weak judiciary, and all other weak institutions. Unfortunately, the security architecture in Africa is also not politically backed up. The peace and security architecture in Africa, which also includes central points of conflict prevention, conflict management, and peace building, even with the role of regional economic communities as well as regional mechanisms. All of these are put in place as frameworks, but in most cases, they are all not working effectively. We are not getting serious results, and all of these are affecting governance. They are affecting governance seriously. The issue of African peer review mechanism is a case in point to affecting governance in Africa, because African leaders have seen that the issue of governance is becoming a serious problem affecting development and progress in Africa. Then let us adopt a framework called the African peer review mechanism, and so that we will make this as a yardstick for measuring the level of governance and level of compliance in member states in Africa. Nigeria in particular only had a second review. We had the first one in 2008, and we had the second one in 2020 and 2021 to measure governance in Africa, and thereby trying to put ourselves on the right track and say, you are not doing it well in this area. Please change it, please correct, provide employment opportunities, invest in the youth, invest in the youth. That will prevent outbreak of conflict, outbreak of crisis, and that will also reduce banditry, that will reduce kidnappings, that will reduce even corruption and even thuggery and even robbery as we are having them across the states in Africa, especially in Africa. So generally, the issue of governance in Africa have been affected by the problem of conflicts in Africa. So we need peace. At the same time, we also need to prevent conflicts. If conflicts are not seriously prevented, then development will continue to elude African countries. And this will also continue for a very, very long time. And if all of these are not settled, if all of these are not corrected, even Professor Badejo alluded to this in his book, then development, issue of good governance, even to achieve democracy at full-fledged level, all of this will elude us if the right things are not done. Thank you, sirs. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bolarinwa. I think that concludes the contributions. I don't know how we will proceed about this. I don't know whether we want to give those who have joined the opportunity to also add their own before we allow Professor Badejo to respond and elaborate more on his thesis. Do we want to, is there anyone should show an indication?
Yes.
They
Sir.
want to talk. Yeah, please identify yourself.
Thank you very much, sir. My name is Najim Jimo, and a former student of both Professor Babafemi Badejo and Professor Adele Jinodu in the early 80s at the University of Lagos. 3 comments I want to make, and I indicated my wish to speak early because I may have to leave to go and do the Muslim prayer. Number 1, I want to disagree with Professor Laja Odukoya on this claim of neocolonialism being what has held us back. Now, the country known as the United Arab Emirates was a protectorate of the British up till 1968. That is 8 years after Nigeria gained independence. And the country itself did not come into being until 1971. So how did they manage to take themselves away from the influence of the so-called neocolonialism? Because the British weren't doing anything with us that they weren't doing with them, and vice versa. But somehow this country grabbed itself, said to itself, we want to move forward, and this country has moved forward. And you can say that regarding many other countries as well. So for me, the idea of neocolonialism being a key factor, I'm afraid is just a very difficult theory for me to buy. Maybe as a student doing a Luther in my 20s, yes, I will grab that, probably claim that as well, but I won't do that in my 60s. Number 2, I do agree with, I don't know who it was, who said democracy is too expensive here. Definitely, democracy is too expensive here. In the UK, David Cameron was the first prime minister to have an aircraft for the office of the prime minister. You can quote me anywhere on this. And that aircraft was not a brand new aircraft. It was a used aircraft, which he thought, bearing in mind the movement that the prime minister had to make, convenience and everything, that that office was deserving of an aircraft. So he brought in an aircraft, being the first prime minister to bring in an aircraft to the office of the prime minister. 2 more comments. Number 3 for me, and I have not had access to the book, so I wouldn't know if this was mentioned at all. The power of recall is the one power that the electorates have not explored in Nigeria. To recall our members of the House of Assembly, members of the National Assembly, to recall our governors. I'm aware that this exists in theory in our constitution, but it's never been explored. And I think we, as the electorates, we need to make an example. We need to make a scapegoat of someone. Let someone somewhere organized and effective recall, bring somebody back from representing us, and perchance they will start to take us seriously. And my final comment, and this is my own theory, right? I came up with 3 things, without which for me, development is not possible. Number 1 is sincerity of purpose on the part of those governing over us. Number 2 is visionary leadership. And if you have the first one, you don't have the second one, you are not going anywhere. If you have the second one, visionary leadership, you don't have sincerity of purpose, you are not going anywhere. And the final of the trial for me is a followership that is truly desirous of bringing about a change. So you combine sincerity of purpose on the part of the leaders, visionary leadership, and then a followership that is intent, truly intent on bringing about change. I think we would stand a chance. Thank you very much. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jimon. We'll take another contributor. I can see a hand up. Please speak up if you want to contribute. No formalities, please speak up.
Well, let me get in there. Nobody is talking.
Yes.
If nobody is, let me just go.
Yeah, Professor, please
yes.
Go on. Yes.
I want to thank all the contributors, and particularly Badejo, Professor Badejo. I just want to make five points without elaboration.
Yes.
It seems to me that the discussion, and perhaps because the book itself, because I once took part in a discussion on it on Zoom on the book itself, I think we've been talking at too generally level. Been talking at too generally level, I think, and we need to get a few things straight. And I've listened to my 5 points. One is that, and this may reflect the unfortunate situation whereby we have redefined social research to statistical research in this country, in our country. Unfortunately, pushed by the NUC, and in most of our faculties of social sciences, statistics have just been reduced to econometrics, statistical analysis, regressions, and so on and so forth. But if one of the major contributions of political theory, traditionally conceived, is that it makes a distinction between level and unit of analysis. And it seems to me that in our work, particularly in the past, I don't know whether it's the current generation or before us, we really don't distinguish between our unit of analysis and the level at which we are looking at it. So, and that is why you find most of us just talking in general terms. I think we need to revisit that issue. The second point I want to make is that when we talk of concepts, quadruple this and that, these concepts are essentially contested concepts. And because they're essentially contested concepts, we cannot reduce them to merely a question of it exists, it doesn't exist, there is no democracy, we are not practicing democracy, and so on and so forth. Because like Max Weber says, we use concepts to simplify what is complex, to reduce them to manageable proportion. That's why the whole issue of level and unit analysis comes in. So when we talk, there's no democracy here, there's no democracy there, there's democracy here, we miss this whole notion that they are essentially contested concepts. And because they're essentially contested, they are the result of over several years of disputation. Democracy, for example, the meaning of democracy 100 years ago is not what it means today. The struggle for democracy has in fact transformed the meaning of democracy from place to place. So that leads me to my other point that history is very, very important in our analysis. We cannot discuss democracy in Nigeria today without looking at the historical context. For example, the struggle for democracy in Nigeria since even pre-colonial times. It did not start with colonial, it started before even pre-colonial, rise and fall of empires. So we should not just be using the denominations given by or the standards set by by Western powers. Take democracy, for example. When I hear people say we are not practicing democracy because election, if you look at the leftist critique of democracy under liberal democracy, let's take Herbert Marcuse, for example. He says that free elections in the Western countries neither remove the master nor the slaves. They are a charade because the people really have no choice in those they are voting for. They really have no choice. So that critique is still very, very strong, even in the US today. The whole question of primaries, what Trump has brought about, it's all part of this whole struggle of the evolution of democracy in these countries. So that leads me to my third point, that in coming to terms with democracy, the question is not whether democracy exists or it does not exist. It is what are the sides for democratic struggle in various countries? Where are the sides for democratic struggle? Because people the point is that people will keep on fighting for democracy. And that is why somebody like the Latin American political scientist, Guillermo O'Donnell, talks of the perpetual crisis of democracy. That democracy is a perpetual struggle to attain what has been promised, and yet remains unfulfilled. So there is a concept of what has been promised, maybe free vote, free that. And yet, because of contradictions in society, those possibilities remain possibilities. But he says that that's the beauty of democracy, that it is an unfinished project. It is a struggle, it's an action in progress. It's something in progress. You keep fighting for it. You keep expanding the space, and so on and so forth. Which is why, for some people, I mean, all this about election observation, trying to measure this, the election was free, it was not fair. What are the measurements you are using to make those conclude? The point is that you can never have, there is something inherent in democracy, even intrinsic in democracy, that makes it, gives rise to revolution of rights and expectations. So, and that leads me to the other point I want to make under this third, under this third point, namely that based on the experience in not just in the third world, but even in the developed world themselves, Amartya Sen has put forward a notion of democracy as development, in which he talks of making certain facilities available, economic facilities, health facilities, structural, and those facilities are more or less facilities which will be provided by a social democratic state. And I'm happy somebody mentioned the APRM. In fact, the beauty of the APRM is that it lists out certain conditions which must be fulfilled in defining what the democratic project in Africa should be about. And the essence of that, two things I like about the APRM. One, it does not dissociate the economic from the political. They are intrinsically bound up. You must provide the political as well as the economic environment within which democracy, defined as social democracy, must pursue. And that is what we have in our chapter 2. And it is also what you have in the African Charter on Human and People. So what I'm saying is there is in fact an African concept, an African attempt to say this is a framework for democracy within Africa. And we can then put within that framework our analysis of whether country A is democratic or it's not democratic in terms of the APRM one is an original African one, and which the Western powers have been trying to undermine because the neoliberalism has taken way. So they keep talking of the free market. When the free market is just a myth, there's no market that is 100% free. And it's up due to manipulation. So that the state has a role to play in regulating. And when you look at their own democratic struggle in their own countries, in Western Europe, they've gone through phases of social welfare democracy. Under the conservative regime, it was a conservative prime minister, Aaron Macmillan, who virtually introduced social welfare in terms of housing for the poor. In other words, so the point I'm making is that if you look at something like the African Charter on popular participation in development and transformation, it makes it clear that this is the concept of Africa, that democracy we have, and that is what we should use to to assess progress of democracy or not. Democracy is not it's not either or. It's in fact a process of struggle. Now, the other point I want to make before I finish is just to emphasize this whole question of democracy as a site for struggle. And I'm sorry the first speaker has left. I mean, I just feel it is, this so-called Lagos model, what does it mean? Accountability, transparency. I mean, because somebody says this is what he's doing, therefore that's what he's doing. The point, of course, in Lagos, as in many other places in Africa, politics has been criminalized by those who claim to be Democrats. Have been criminalized. Those are the ones, people they virtually criminalized politics. And the character issue has become nothing in a calculation. Of course, democracy can bring out can make a criminal a head of state, but democracy as a site for struggle also makes that possibility possible, make it possible for you, once you make that mistake of putting a criminal there, then you have a choice to remove that person next time. And that is the whole thing that Trump is fighting about in the US. So I think it's important, all this talk of the Lagos model, we should not, there is nothing called the Lagos model. I mean, those of us who live in Lagos, as we live in other parts of Nigeria, know that politics has been criminalized and that people are living under serious, so it's no point of trying to take this as an example out of it. All of it's all the same thing like this. Politics has been criminalized. And we cannot just go by what people say, what is accountability, transparency in government. We did a study some years back of between 2004 and 2022 or so, I can't remember now, 2015 or 2017, of the amount of budgets that 10 state governments in Nigeria across the 6 geopolitical zones spend on education, on health, on water, on housing. Collectively, those 4 or 5 areas accounted for less than 3% of the total budget of the 10 states when you look at it. And that when you have to look at actual budget released, it's even less than that. And yet you have chapter 2 there. And which in fact makes it that this is what government should do. So those are the kind of things that we should be doing in our analysis, not just talking in broad terms, broad general terms. Those are something that we should be doing an analysis, And I think it's a pity that we research has gone down, and we have reduced this simply to statistical regression analysis and so on and so forth. But I think what is good about Badejo's providing this is for us to think about these issues, about those concepts. Those concepts we need to be careful and know that they are contested concepts, because any questions can be raised about them. But it is in terms of how do you relate this to sites of struggle, like the answers, for example, or trade strikes by academics. Those are the things that will advance democracy. It's not just there's no democracy. Yeah, yes, we know there's no democracy, but what can be done about it? And what I'm suggesting is that there is a theory of African democracy that we can now fall back in the concept of in the APRM that should guide our own analysis, our critique of what is happening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Idowu. That was very, very helpful contribution. Do we still have one? Because we have to give Professor Badejo some time, and we are less than 30 minutes into our time. Is there anybody there who wants to make a statement? I'm going to allow Professor Badejo to have the last word because it's his book. All I can say as moderator is to quickly look at some of the things that were said, some of which Professor Badejo had accommodated in his very helpful contribution. I think we talked about this Lagos model. I think Dr. Portia Roelofs talks a lot about accountability and made a difference between those who see performance the key to transparency and those who see responsiveness. In his own preference, that accessibility is the contour, is how we should judge accountability. Professor Odukoya and Dr. Johnson were very close in their presentations in terms of looking at the role of external factors, the nature of the state, the character of a parasitic elite. And then, of course, Dr. Bolarinwa syncs with that when he talks about imperfect democracy, very expensive democracy, and that development has been hampered by internal conflicts in Africa, creating a threat to peace and security. Corruption, of course, continues to be a problem. The leadership is very poor. The institutions are very weak, and there is poverty. And then, of course, Dr. Bolarinwa points out that regional organizations, even with their APMs and all that, are very ineffective in helping states to achieve their purpose. I'm very happy that Professor Bernardis, talked about not being absolute about concepts, and that particularly our democracy, which Professor Dubai and Dr. Johnson seems to have written off, is an unfinished process. It's a work in progress all the time. We could see from our last election that it was slightly different from previous elections. The election is expensive, democracy is expensive, but what is the alternative? Where Professor suggests that maybe people must take the law into their own hands. I think he was preaching Odukoya was preaching some revolution there, but that's easier said than done. If we're not going to enter into the realm of revolution, how do we reform things that they continue to work? And I think that our democracy, even under Buhari, the last election saw some results that were incredible. Even the president himself lost in his own state. If we can get our elections right, we can begin to choose our leaders, and we can make the votes count. Then we can begin to influence the way our leaders perform. We can punish them for not doing well and reward them for performance with re-election. So I don't think we should be absolute in rejecting this. Our system is very poor, our leadership is bad, our institutions are weak, there's a lot of corruption, but we can increasingly work on how do we get better elections? How do we get better people represented? Because like Dr. Johnson said, you need about 1 billion to be a governor, if not more. And how many good people, how many professors and academics and can get even 10 million, can even get 5 million to pay for the gubernatorial ticket. So I think we are, quite honestly, we are still talking about the things we have said over and over and over again. I'm sure that Professor Badejo's book, the idea is to push some kind of pathway through the thick forest of confusion, and we shall therefore allow him the privilege to round up the discussion by talking on his book. Professor Badejo. Professor Badejo.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you very, very much, Professor Otubanjo. And I am extremely grateful for your chairing this meeting and trying to steer us towards the book that we are trying to look at. And I must also appreciate my own teacher, Professor Adeleji Nodu, who had actually over a year ago served as a discussant in trying to look at this book and as a contribution that I was bringing to bear in terms of my interactions at the theoretical and practical level, as someone mentioned, in trying to look at how do we move forward. My focus was not on democracy, even though the issue of democracy was handled within the book tangentially. But my focus in the book was trying to look at the debate that has been taking place in the developmental arena. And what I call the developmental arena, perhaps the debates that have been led by the UNDP for quite a while, but actually the humanitarian summit, the World Summit that was held in 2016 went some way in trying to say what are the pillars that we can look at if we are to move forward. And in terms of those pillars, we, as at now, because as at that time, there was suggestion of a triple nexus, that we have three pillars to focus on: peace and security, development, as well as humanitarianism, as the emphasis in 2016. But I then pointed out that by 2020, two different entities of the United Nations looked at those and argued very strongly on the need to incorporate a fourth one, and that fourth one being the human rights. Not that the human rights was not of concern before. The concern for human rights you will find in the Charter of the United Nations from the very beginning, and that charter has rubbed on the various constitutions that we have been having around the world, through to the Chapter 2, and even the People's the African People's Charter that Professor Jinodu has mentioned. So these four pillars were then referred to as the quadruple nexus. The quadruple nexus, meaning that there are interlinkages between all those four, and you cannot implement any of them at any point in time without a collaborative orientation with the others. And so I looked at this, and as I pointed out in the book, I was one of the 5 people that worked on this for the United Nations. 4 of us were working with the UN Economic Commission for Africa, and one other person was trying to synthesize everything for the UN Office of the Special Advisor on Africa. Now, bringing a theoretical background into all that, I came up with the fact that the quadruple nexus are not self-implementing. And if they are not self-implementing, how do we get them implemented? And this analytical framework could actually answer some of the questions that even Alhaji Nojim Jimo also raised in his own intervention as to why is UAE where it is? Why are other countries in Asia where they are? And in looking at those, the 4 crucial implementation background for the 4 quadruple pillars, I suggested that governance that many of us have been talking about earlier today is crucial for implementation. And in looking at governance, I did not want to look into everything, or I wasn't trying to factor in everything that is normally put into governance, but suggested that two things are crucial in governance: leadership as well as the level of corruption. And of course, with respect to leadership, I was very much noting the leadership deficit that we face, which ties into visionary leadership, as Alaji Jimo puts it, or sincerity of purpose. We are still talking about the same thing with respect to the three different aspects that he was positing. So rule of law is normally said that it's crucial. If you don't have rule of law, nothing works. But that rule of law has an inverse relationship with corruption. The more of one, the less of the other. That if you're able to handle corruption, you will be in a position to deal with the issue of. Then crucial and important, and differentiates my analysis from some others, is that we cannot push on with governance in countries alone and behave as if those countries are a cocoon. They are on their own and nothing else is happening in the world around them. And so I posit that the external dynamics in which every country exists and operates is crucial. Some have been able to, if you're talking about external dynamics, US is affected, but less so for a country like Nigeria, where many things had been set in place, whether you like it or not. And some of the things that Laja, Professor Odukoya was talking about are taken care of when you look at what I was looking at as external dynamics in the work. And the external dynamics would take charge of several problems that countries face today. You look at the Sahel, the external franchises that dominate in those places and make it impossible to achieve any success along peace and security. So I'm suggesting that we need to look at external dynamics. We need to look at external dynamics with respect to imperialism, that you cannot be talking about the situation in our type countries without looking at the IMF and World Bank and the way they had set the world arena. Of course, China is trying to struggle against that today, but it's still a long way off in trying to define a counter-economic order, because most of the time it's on just a political order, political military order, as if that's all. But the sucking that is taking place at the level of the realities that countries face and the veto power that countries like the United States has when it comes to those institutions that it's set up. And my own emphasis is not to use the terms that Laja was using. I did that at an earlier age, but that, yes, we can still look at the same thing without the kind of what he said that I would have said in my days when I was teaching him. The World Bank and the IMF were not set up for the purposes of the survival of African countries. They were set up the way the United States saw that it wanted to define the world as the victor at the end of that war. Yes, it brought along Europe, some in Europe with itself, to work together to stave off communism as it saw it then. And but the United States alone, if it does not agree, you don't get anything out of IMF and World Bank, because you need 85% of votes, and the US has 17 point something, whether 17.8%. How do you get 85 when one person has 17.8? You may look at, oh, 17 is very small. But when you think deeply, you realize that Nothing can be done outside of that. And I don't blame the victor at the end of a war in shaping the world in its own image. It is those of us who were not part of it then that needs to struggle to see how we can realize change if we are going to have our own type of development. And going beyond the question of external dynamics is the paucity of institutions. It was mentioned by a number of people, and I think both Dr. Bolarinwa and Dr. Johnson spoke about that. They are important. Institutions remain very crucial. For me, what I've done in that book is to try to pull together, based on a desktop review of literature that is in the world today, that is very much being debated. And I agree with Professor Jinadu that these are contested concepts, and they keep evolving, and they will continue to evolve beyond all of us, but that we need to engage at the level of what's happening with respect to all this, not just that we theorize alone. And then I went away from that by using the data that we had used for the UN Economic Commission for Africa survey, when I found out that a large proportion of the number who responded to the whole of West and Central Africa were Nigerians. So I was able to extract that data, 207, and was able to expatiate on what Nigerians were saying. And I think that the survey lends credence to some of the issues that are at debate with respect to what we drew from 207 Nigerians with respect to their views of whether there is democracy in their country and whether that democracy is dealing with their particular interests. And the views expressed by these informed, because it was an online research that was skewed in favor of people who understood working with some of UNDP and others, and prior personal efforts in order to come up with the statistics. The Nigerians understood the need to ask critical questions as a nation, and in the survey, they strongly support a quadruple nexus model to adequately capture and create synergies in reactions on the 4 pillars that aid agencies tend to focus on. And of course, the statistics agreed on high deficiency in governance, in leadership, prevalence of conflict with failure in conflict prevention and containment capacity, the widespread insecurity, corruption, impunity, and lack of transparency. Very poor development, as shown by key indicators, economic marginalization and across various lines, human rights violation, even by state authorities, weakened institutions, and in the fragility of the Nigerian state. So in effect, one is trying to suggest that, but in order for us to move forward, we must deal with not just the pillars that have been identified by aid givers at the international level, but we must look at why are the suggestions that those people have been giving us since independence, why are they not working? They are not bold enough or not keen enough to say it as it is, to confront our leadership. I'm glad Professor Jinodu raised issue about the Lagos model. That what are we talking about in the exaggeration of that Lagos model carried to the federal level? We are all seeing in the current situations that we face. So for me, I am extremely grateful. I don't want to take all the time. I'm extremely grateful to have this discussion. I have learned a lot. I've learned things to reflect further on and to seek to improve on my work. Definitely, Professor Jinodu mentioned the APRM. In carrying out the study for the UNECA, we had to deal with the APRM, the mechanism itself, learn what they were doing and incorporated what they were doing. And that influences my conception of democracy as not being elections, not the 4-yearly elections that we see, that once you do that, then you have democracy, but emphasizing the performance issues that are necessary before you can start talking about whether you have a government of the people, by the people, for the people. Because outside of that, you elect leaders. And so some of you have seen the cryptic video going around of the Senate president laughing and saying there is a motion before him that says, let people breathe. And he won not. And you can see the joke in which he was treating the. So for me, it's not a question of, it's the performance definition of democracy. And I agree, it is a contested one. There are those who are suggesting that the 4-yearly elections are taking place and all is great. But when you don't pay attention to the performance, the governance, maybe where I am a bit different from Professor Jinodu is that it's not that, oh, just wait, when it's the next 4 years, you choose out of the same set of people that he had pointed out is largely a charade. You choose the same if you're tweedledum kind of situation. But then I also agree that it is work in progress. All these are not issues that are going to be solved in one day. Let me yield back to Mr. Chairman and not take all the time, except if there is anybody else that wants to talk, but that's at the discretion of the chairman. But Mr. Chairman, sir, thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much for such an enlightening contribution. Like Professor Badejo said, is there anyone that wants to make a point of 2 minutes before we round off finally? Anyone? Just raise your hand if you want to. So, okay. In the absence of any other contribution, I want to thank Mr. Tobia for organizing this, and very grateful to Professor Badejo, Femi Badejo, for making this book available for our interrogation. I hope that we will be able to help him to see more clearly. Obviously, the situation that we find ourselves and that the situation that it focuses on of our development, underdevelopment, is not irredeemable. We must not accept that it's irredeemable. We must continue to interrogate the problems. And that's the beauty of what Professor Badejo has done. He has not given up on us. And in spite of the pessimistic assessments of democracy and leadership, society, the corruption and all that, we must agree, we must go along with Professor Jinodu's perspective that these are contested areas. We must not write up these concepts as if they are given and dead. We must continue to interrogate. And this book is a work of interrogation, of advancing our understanding of the problem and our understanding of what to do. I hope that we'll continue to interrogate, we'll continue to look for solutions. Like I said before, the last election may not be perfect, but they were better than the previous ones. And we hope that the next one will be better. The younger ones were out, they mobilized, they didn't get what they want, but next time they might just get it. The society will continue to grow. And like every other democratic society, we are likely to continue to work on our democracy and improve it. It's not perfect anywhere, and it's not likely to be perfect here. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we thank you very much for spending these 2 hours to look at the problems of Nigeria, of development in Africa. We need it a lot. Like Professor Badejo was saying, we have a leadership that is insensitive. In the midst of all this suffering, people are still flaunting power and luxury. Our President of Senate must be told in every forum that he ought not to be going around the way he is, as if he's an emperor. This is not the time for those show of power and privilege. It is time to hide your head and side with the people. The leadership that does not side with the people is ultimately going to be destroyed. And when we begin to hear about coup in Niger and so on, we do all these theories, but we also must know that the people have been watching. And the leadership have always been insensitive. And we need sensitive leaders. And we need to have leaders that will read Professor Badejo's book before they make policies. That's the kind of leadership that we have. Leaders that read, that are led by ideas, not by materialism, not by escort vehicles and motorcycle dispatchers and so on. Nobody cares about all that. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your presence,
Mr. Chairman,
time.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
please, I just want to appreciate my graduate school colleague, Professor Kalin Idi, joining from Massachusetts, and Josie D'Angelo also, and several other people, Amadou Sidibe, several friends internationally, Radu Velia from Romania, all who took the time to be part of this. It's very much appreciated. I thank all of you, even if I'm unable to quickly mention your name. Sheson, Ekishola, and Koka, Onita, all of them. Thanks a lot.
Well, thank you very much for supporting this process. I don't know whether Toba has something to say, if you are still there.
Yeah, Toby.
Toby. Yes, sir. There's anything I have to say is to appreciate you, sir, for the masterful moderation you did. The session went well, all thanks to your taking the lead. And thank you so much for the comment you made. The graduate research clinic, like we've said, is a community of graduate students, early career researchers, senior academics, as well as independent scholars across African diaspora. And this is the kind of engagement we want to foster in the community. Having a no holds barred debate around social issues. Books like Professor Badejo throws up questions for us. So yes, to just say once again, thank you for your time, and also to invite you to join the community. The link has been shared below, and look forward to our next public intellectual seminar series. Good day to you all.
Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor. God bless.